Ya Allah, aku pasrahkan diriku sepenuhnya pada saat ini kepada penguasa langit dan
liquidity preference. Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. You're listening to the ECO162 podcast, where we explore how microeconomics works in the real world. I'm your host, Siti Aisyah. In this episode, we're focusing on two major concepts in economics: consumer behavior and economic distribution, and how they shape the economy of China. Joining me today are my brilliant groupmates who will each take us through a different part of this topic. So let's begin.
Hi, I'm Sophia.
Hello, my name is Alia. Hi, I'm Dania.
Hi, I'm Hannah.
Let's get into it with our first guest, Nurhana. So, China still has the largest population, right?
Yes, it's about 1.41 billion people in 2034. It's also a huge country in land size and one of the most economies in the world.
But not everyone is doing equally well.
Exactly. City residents earn around 49,000 yuan a year, while rural people around 20,000. Coastal areas like Shanghai are rich, but inner provinces like Gansu are much poorer.
And how is the government fixing this?
They started a policy called Common Prosperity that aims to make taxes fairer and improves in rural areas.
China's middle class is also growing, right?
Yes, they are spending more on things such as education, health, and tech. This group plays a big role in shaping the market.
So it's not just about numbers, it's about people.
Exactly. When we understand how people live and spend, we can build policies that supports everyone better.
Thank you, Nurhana. Now moving on to Sophia. What's your thought about consumer behavior?
Now I'm going to talk about the theory of consumer behavior. Have you ever noticed how your first bite of your favorite food is always the most satisfying? Okay, let's take an example of the jasmine tea because we're talking about China. Okay, that first sip of hot, fragrant jasmine tea, it's calming, refreshing, and perfect after a busy day. But by the fifth and sixth cup, the excitement fades.
What is actually happening?
This everyday experience is a perfect example of the economic concept called total utility and marginal utility. Total utility is the total satisfaction get from all the units of a product or service you consume. Let's take an example, enjoying dim sum at a Cantonese restaurant. The first bite of dim sum might give you 10 points of happiness, but the second bite adds 7 points, and the third bite, perhaps a sticky rice dumpling, so it's just gonna add you 4 points. So, your total utility after that 3 bites is 10 plus 7 plus 4 equals to 21 points. You're happy overall, but each additional bite adds less joy than the last. Marginal utility is the extra satisfaction you get from consuming more than one unit. In this example, first bite marginal utility is equal to 10, second bite marginal utility is equal to 7, and the third bite marginal utility is equal to 4. This shows the law of diminishing marginal utility, where as you consume more, the added happiness decreases.
So each bite gives you less satisfaction than the one before?
Yes, that is the law of diminishing marginal utility.
Next, what's your thought on consumer equilibrium?
In my opinion, consumer equilibrium is when a person has allocated their limited income across various goods and services in a way that maximizes their total utility. Maximization approach is based on the idea that consumers behave rationally. They try to get the most satisfaction for every unit of currency they spend.
Thank you, Sophia.
You're welcome.
Now moving on to economic distribution. Dania, how are wages determined in a perfectly competitive market?
In a perfectly competitive labor market, the wages are determined by the market itself. The characteristic of this market is actually normally perfectly elastic or horizontally supply curve. There are many sellers, and since each firm is small, no single seller can influence the price of goods and service.
So no business set wages alone?
Exactly. For example, during China's early economic reforms, we saw a similar characteristic: a large labor force and many small business. In such a scenario, wages are influenced by the market, not by individuals' firms' decision.
What determines the equilibrium?
There's actually several factors, but the key point is that when the market demand equals to the market supply of labor, then that is what we call wage rate.
How does the market respond to changes?
That's a very good question, Alia. The market supply curve of workers slope upwards, while the market demand curve of workers slope downwards. In a perfect competition, a firm simply adjusts the number of workers it hires to match a given wage rate, not the other way around.
2 hours later.
Does this apply in China too?
Yes, firms in China's labor market responded to the market changes rather than setting wages on their own. It's a clear example of how equilibrium can influence the hiring decision.
Now let's touch on other rewards to factors: rent, profit, and interest. First, rent.
Sure, there are many definitions of rent. David Ricardo defined it as the price paid for the use of land. On the other hand, Alfred Marshall saw rent as an income derived from land ownership or natural gift. In China, land and natural resources are crucial to the development. If land is homogeneous and equally located, scarcity rent occurs. But if land differs in equality or location, you can get differential rent. This explains the rent differences across the province in China.
I am absolutely mentally, spiritually, physically tired.
Yes, the theory have definitely evolved. J.S. Mill and others expanded the Ricardian theory. Now, economists reconsider land a scarce resource with no perfect elasticity. In China, for example, high demand keeps land value increasing.
How about profit?
Profit is divided into normal profit and economic profit. Normal profit occurs when total revenue equals to total costs, including explicit and implicit costs. It represents a minimum reward and meaning the firm has zero economic profit. That's when economic profit comes in. It happens when total revenue exceeds total costs, including opportunity costs. It shows the firm is doing better than just surviving.
Lastly, how about interest?
Interest is the return paid to the capital owners and play a huge role in the investment and saving decision. It can be nominal, real, or effective, and it influences the supply and demand for loanable funds. With higher interest rate, the saving rate goes up too. But if the interest rate are low, borrowing increases. Theories like loanable funds theory and Keynes' liquidity preference theory explain this. In China, interest rates have a significant impact on capital flow and economic activity. It's a major factor in directing growth.
Thank you, Danya, for the explanation.
You're welcome.
Now, Alia, what kind of economic policies that China implemented?
Well, one of the main strategies is imposing progressive tax rates, so higher income earners pay more in taxes. The revenue from these taxes is then used to fund essential public services like education, healthcare, and social welfare programs. It's all part of a broader goal to build a fairer and more harmonious society.
That sounds impactful, but I imagine taxation isn't the only tool being used.
Exactly. China is also focused on fair wage practices. They've raised the minimum wage in many regions and pushed for wage reforms to ensure equal pay for equal work. The government also keeps a close eye on housing markets, especially in major cities, to prevent excessive rent increases and to stop the cost of living from becoming unaffordable.
What about housing policies?
China has made real progress there. The government supports the construction of low-cost rental and subsidized housing, especially in big cities like Beijing and Shanghai. These programs really help low and middle-income families access affordable places to live.
Are there any real-world results or systems that stand out?
Stop it. get some help.
Definitely. One great example is the universal health insurance coverage. It provides basic medical insurance to over 95% of China's population. That significantly lowers healthcare costs and makes it easier for people to access and services they need.
Thank you for sharing, Alia. To wrap up, understanding consumer behavior helps us see how people make choices that affects demand, prices, and business strategies. Meanwhile, economic distribution shows how income is shared, fair wages, rent, profit, and interest support a stable and fair economy. In China, efforts like tax reforms, fair wages, and public services aim to reduce inequality and build a more inclusive economy. Going forward, public education and balanced growth will be the key to a long-term progress. That's all for today. Thanks to Nurhana, Dania, Sophia, and Alia for sharing your insights.
You're welcome. I'm so hungry. Shall we grab our lunch after this?
We totally should.
Oh my god! Wow!
That's the end of our ECO162 podcast. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Bye-bye.